Okay, we're going to get started, and thanks everyone for joining for the first of the county leadership webinars. So this particular one is on planning for your county AGMs, which of course are coming up quick and fast, or right up until the next few months, but it's to give you a bit of time to prepare. So as always with our webinars, feel free to type in the Q&A or type in the chat if there's any questions, and we'll touch on them as we go along through it. But hopefully the presentation covers quite a bit for you. So the first thing with your AGM, I know there's always a lot of to-do lists and you feel like you're pulled in many directions. So what we're hoping to do is put a bit of organisation on that for you about what's about to happen over the coming weeks, months, preparing for your AGM. So hopefully this will help you as we go through it, but it is important that you kind of create your own to-do list then, with your order of priorities down to what's most important, least important, and tick them off as you go along. So a few key things to be aware of before we get started. By the rule book, all county AGMs should be held on or before the 1st of January. So that's obviously getting a lot of them done before the new year kicks in. So you should have your dates in mind that you're going to run your county AGM. So that's by rule, all county AGMs are on or before the 1st of January. Last year, of course, things went a little up the left in that we were completely stuck in the middle of COVID-19. I know we're still there to a certain extent, but you'll see from the guidelines coming up, there now is the option of some face-to-face meetings as well. But that's not to say if you want to keep it virtually. I know the numbers that's still going isn't helping people, but last year we had no choice. It was all online. But I suppose what you'll see tonight is we're going to give you a mix of, well, if you're running your AGM face-to-face, here's some guidelines. If you're running it virtually, here's some guidelines. So we're going to give you a little bit of a blended in relation to it. So you have those choices now of keeping it virtual, depending on how the next few weeks and months keep going, or that in-person one. So there is choices there for your county. The in-person, the current guidelines, so you would have seen these guidelines have gone out over the last few weeks after the most recent update. So where indoor meetings are being organised in the souths and the 26 counties, club and county committee meetings, including county conventions, AGMs, etc., can take place indoors once all participants are considered immune. So that means they're fully vaccinated or they're recovered from COVID-19 within the previous 6 months. Consideration should be given to room densities, meeting durations and ventilations when planning such events. That's really important, that it's not in a small clustered room, that you're trying to keep the meeting as short as possible. And key to it all is that it is a well ventilated room, and that's really important. So we'll be talking about that when we're looking at things to look out for. Where participants have mixed immunity status, indoor meetings must be conducted in pods of 6 people. So you don't know everyone is fully vaccinated, or you don't know they've recovered in the last six months, you have to treat it as a mixed immunity meeting. So indoor meetings conducted in pods of 6 people, with the overall number of pods having regard to the size of the venue and with substantial social distancing between pods. So to anyone looking on, they should clearly be able to see the separate pods of 6 and that they're operating independent of each other, or a maximum of 6, with no interaction or sharing of equipment and no opportunity for them to mix or stray in another one's group or meeting space. So for the equipment, that includes things like a microphone being handed from one to the other. Shouldn't be happening at the meeting. In the north, when the 6 counties, club and county committee meetings may be held indoors, subject to a risk assessment being carried out in advance by the organiser to determine the maximum number of people permitted to attend. So it will depend on the venue. The organiser must also take reasonable measures to limit the risk of transmission of the virus. What is important is the person responsible for organising the gathering, if requested to do so, must be able to provide a copy of the risk assessment. So it does need to be done, because anyone can turn up at any time and ask for this, and an account of the reasonable measures taken. So really important for that to happen. Indoor meetings of 15 people or fewer, which is unlikely for an AGM, do not need a risk assessment. But when organising meetings in either jurisdiction, it's important that indoor spaces are well ventilated at all times by leaving doors and windows open. Even though we're in the winter, unfortunately, tell people to bring a few extra coats, but we do need to leave everything open. Frequently touched surfaces such as door handles, etc., should be cleaned regularly, while good hand hygiene should be encouraged. So having your sanitizer at the door, and social distancing measures observed. And the use of masks in all indoor settings continues to be recommended. I know we'll have a few people on from the counties across Britain as well. And it's just to look up in your jurisdiction, what is the current guidelines in relation to indoor meetings. For AGM opportunities, there is loads of opportunities when it comes to your AGM. So I know sometimes people dread their AGM and, oh, the biggest meeting of the year and everything, but there is opportunities. Number one, to reflect on the year. Look at the good things. We're quick to pick at the things that maybe didn't go well, but look at all the good stuff that happened. And particularly between last year and this year and the restrictions that we faced, the amount of activity that clubs and yourselves have organised is phenomenal. And it's really important to actually reflect on that, let people know and share all the good information of what's happened, to bring in fresh faces. And we're going to touch on this in a slide or two down the way, but it is an opportunity to bring in fresh faces, to bring new people onto your boards, but to know who you want, to have a discussion with them prior. So we'll touch on that as we go down through the slides. Communicate your vision. So it's very hard to ask people to come on board with you when they don't know where they're going. So what is the vision? What does your board hope to achieve? What's your county hoping to achieve over the next year, 2 years? Because maybe if you can get people to buy into your vision, they'll want to get involved in it. So it's a way of making sure everybody's fully aware, where are we hoping to go with this? And to set foundations to plan ahead. So we can't plan if we don't have a foundation there in the first place. So where are we now in relation to X, Y, or Z? Where do we hope to go? So all of those are opportunities at your AGM. You have a captive audience. Yes, there's the reports and there's the voting in nominations with people, etc. But use as an opportunity to actually let people know, well, look, this is what we are. We're a bigger picture. We do a lot of stuff. We've done some great stuff during the year, and here's where we're hoping to go ahead. So use your AGM as an opportunity. So on your AGM, some of the, I suppose, the nitty-gritty bits in relation to rules. Clubs should receive at least 4 weeks notice in writing of the date and the venue of the county convention, together with nomination and motion papers. So these are all things you can look up in the official guide at any stage, and you'll come across them. These papers must be returned to the county secretary at least 3 weeks before the county convention. So all the papers returned, and the club secretary should receive a copy of the agenda, the list of nominees and motions, along with proposing clubs at least 1 week prior to county convention. So as I said, you'll see all of these guidelines in the official guide, and it's really important that these are adhered to. In relation to the nominations as well, if an officer is stepping down, and just please note this, ensure this is communicated to clubs in advance so that clubs are not nominating the same person who has already decided to step down. So if the secretary has decided they're not going forward, it's important that this is communicated, because otherwise all the clubs will just send in the same name again. So it is really important that it's actually communicated out there to clubs. It should be clearly indicated who would like to go for re-election and who is stepping down, so that the vacancies can be addressed prior to the night and allow people the opportunity to find out about the role before getting voted in. So they're just two little keynotes in relation to the nominations. And we've seen it so often where either a person realizes after the meeting they've been voted in, or somebody is nearly forced back into the position because the clubs had nominated them, but they had made the decision to actually step away. Just to take notes on those two things. For your AGM as well, the reports that you will need for your AGM, the chairperson's address, and this should, as mentioned a few slides previous, look at the highs, the lows, the challenges. So going through the year and what it was, but really we can pick on the challenges a lot, but like highlight those highs as well, the really good stuff that's been done, and show a bit of praise. I know we're not great at praising ourselves or praising the group, but as I said, there's a lot of good stuff done. So make sure we highlight those highs as well. The secretary's report, so it should be a factual report, so like an historical account of the year, the number of fixtures played, new competitions, etc., and then a separate results section. And it's remembering these reports, you might think at the time they're a bit of a pain to pull all together, but they're the history of your county. So also storing them somewhere important, like that's really important, that they're the history for people looking back. This is what they're going to read through. The treasurer's report, so it's a financial report supported by bank statements. So really important that all of the reports are done properly, particularly around the finances. Everything's covered off for the end of year. For any treasurer that's on, I know we ran the role of the treasurer webinars previous, and we will have more. It's really important that there is templates there to help out with stuff. So make sure the financial report is done properly. The other reports, development officer report. So all of the development that's done in the county. Again, you don't presume people know these things. So get the report in. There could be a children's officer report, CODA officer report, and any other reports. The PRO might decide there's a report of the year because maybe you've gone to new levels in relation to streaming, etc. So reports that you think are relevant then to have at your AGM. But these are the key ones to have in there. At your AGM itself, it shall elect as per Rule 177 all the officers listed, so the chairperson, vice chairperson, secretary, assistant secretary, registrar, treasurer, assistant treasurer, PRO, and delegates to provincial and central council. Each county then must also appoint a development officer and a children's officer. So this is the county executive picking these people rather than the nominations, and they will then become a member of the executive committee. Existing officers then hold office until the end of the AGM. So the existing officers that were there, they remain in office until the end of the AGM, but these are the officers that are key in it. But don't forget the development officer and children's officer. It's the county executive then that will appoint those rather than them actually being nominated. Adhering to Rule 61 if you're doing a virtual AGM. So as I said, for this webinar, we're looking at both online, a virtual webinar or AGM, and a face-to-face AGM. So if it was a virtual AGM, election of officers of the association shall be by secret ballot. The election of officers and members of the executive committee to be conducted by means of a delivered vote. I know a lot of counties got used to this last year, and there is a lot of guidelines on this. If you need them, we can send them on to you again. The onus is on the voter to ensure that the vote is submitted and in time, and by means of post, courier, hand delivery or other means on or before the date and time to the place specified on the ballot paper. Only nominees who declare in writing or email to the county secretary at least 2 weeks before county convention that they're standing for election shall be eligible for election. So it's very clear guidelines there in relation to if it's a virtual AGM, but I would imagine quite a lot of our counties, when they get the chance now, will be looking at face-to-face. So as I said, we will touch on both of them. The delivered vote procedures, what that means, a returning officer should be appointed by the relevant executive committee to oversee the voting process, to include the distribution of ballot paper. So this is for your virtual AGM. Each eligible voter shall be provided with a declaration, a voting paper, accompanied with a smaller envelope, and an envelope addressed to the returning officer. A vote will be declared invalid if the declaration is not completed and returned in the addressed envelope. So it must be included in it. Each voter must return the signed declaration along with their vote, the vote to be placed in the smaller envelope and sealed to protect the integrity of the secret ballot in the address, the envelope by the appointed time. And what is very important here, the returning officer should not be a candidate in an election. Okay, so it's somebody that's overseeing the voting process, but it's not a candidate in the election. So this is all in relation to if you're still running your virtual AGM. Whether it's virtual or face-to-face, don't leave it to the night. Okay, so there is stuff, and that's what sessions like this evenings are looking at. Have clear role descriptions. So what is expected? So maybe when you're sending out for nominations, you'll see in our website, there's a little booklet on the roles of county officers. It's an excellent little booklet. Maybe even download that and attach it or send the link so that there's clear role descriptions, or alter those role descriptions to match your county. So at least if somebody is being nominated for county PRO, if they're not matching the role descriptions that the club send it in, are they going to do the role? So having clear role descriptions, and also it can be easier for people to say yes if they actually know what the role is. So a little bit of work done on the role descriptions can really help you get the right people. Identify the person then with the qualities and skills required. So as we said, PRO, for example, if they can't use social media in an era that we're in at the minute, it's going to be very hard for them to be the PRO for the county. So picking people with the qualities and skills required, and maybe headhunting to an extent, ask potential volunteers, because there is people that will sit back and say, oh, geez, I don't know if that's for me, versus being asked, there's nearly that personal touch, and they might come forward. And even thinking of your own clubs, maybe one club identifying somebody who's really good for another club and mention it to them, it can show something different because you're thinking outside the box in relation to your overall county. Ensure there's a clear outline of what is required and expected. So how many meetings? Is it monthly? Is it bi-monthly? Because that person could be thinking, I'm about to sign up to something that I'm going to be stuck in every day, or we're going to have to meet every week. But if they know what the expectations are, there's a greater chance of somebody signing up to it. And established subcommittees then were required. So making things a little bit easier. So the development officer, instead of having to be on their own, that development work group with somebody maybe responsible for referee development, somebody responsible for coach education, somebody responsible for club school links, so that it's broken down. It's a lot easier just to look after one of those areas than a development officer thinking they have to look after everything. So establish subcommittees where you feel it's required also. So don't leave these things until the night. Try and think about them in advance and prep people for your actual AGM. The benefits of having all the roles filled: there's a better structure because you have everybody there. You'll have good officers, especially if you've matched the skill set to the role that you want. There's no point in having somebody who just can't deal with numbers as the treasurer, because they're responsible very much for numbers. So getting good officers, more teamwork, so working together, sharing ideas and not being afraid to share ideas. And that goes around to the leadership of the group. And I know we have plenty of webinars on that as well. Spread of workload. So not everybody, if there's only 2 officers or 3 officers, having actually more officers, you're going to spread the workload. Better efficiency, more involvement from members. You'll have more productivity because you have more hands to do things. Better organization, and a key thing, the opportunity to plan ahead. If you're constantly firefighting because there's only a handful of people, you can never actually think where you want to go. All you're worried about is, well, what's happened today and what's happening tomorrow. But really, if you have enough people and everyone in the right roles and things working properly, you can also think, well, this is where we want to be in a year's time. This is where we want to be in 2 years' time, and get that opportunity to plan ahead. So there's some of the benefits of having the roles filled. And yes, it is important to have a full executive, but it's equally as important to ensure that each officer knows their role and are active in their role. And I know it's a line we'll probably use again, but for some officers, it's as well being empty rather than have somebody who's not active, because they're actually putting their name to something but not doing anything. So if it means waiting and getting the right person, that's important. So they need to know their role, but most importantly, they need to be active in their role also. So it's not always just about having the full, but getting the right people into those positions. If you're planning for an in-person AGM, choose an appropriate venue to adhere to guidelines. So that's the number one, especially, as I said, we are unfortunately still witnessing our numbers that we are in relation to COVID. So choose an appropriate venue to adhere to guidelines. Thinking of those, if you, for instance, don't know that everyone is fully vaccinated, then you need to plan for the pods of 6 maximum. You need to have a good big venue that you're going to be able to do that. Set out an agenda with clear objectives. Send out required documents in advance of the meeting to ensure that all attendees have the correct documents. This should include the agenda and a list of objectives for the AGM, so everybody knows exactly what's happening. Establish responsibilities for attendees. So who books the meeting? So in relation to your county executive, who books it? What setup is going to be required? Who will chair the meeting, which is usually your chairperson, unless the chairperson is going to be absent. Who will be presenting? Because maybe on the night, instead of it just being paper handed out, maybe your development officer or your finance officer is actually going to do a small presentation on what their year entailed in the report. So if they are, who is going to be presenting and how long for, so they can prepare for it. If they're going to be presenting, of course, you're going to need to know what equipment you need as well. So the setup is really important. Advise clubs of what delegates are allowed to attend. So again, you'll clearly see in our official guide who is eligible to vote for all of these meetings. So advise who's allowed to attend and request the names in advance. So all registrations can be checked before the night for voting rights. And this helps you before the night to have the list of names, because if you were trying to check to make sure X, Y, or Z is a registered member on the night. You'll be there all night trying to go through the registration system. But it is important to make sure that's done, to make sure that they actually are eligible, they've paid their membership, that they are eligible to vote at your AGM. Ensure that details of where and when the AGM is get shared well in advance. And of course, if there's any changes, that it gets shared well in advance. A reminder should also be sent to all attendees 2 or 3 days before the AGM. And then on the night, get into the venue early to ensure everything is set up and ready to go on time. You don't want to be in any sort of a fluster. So getting there, whoever needs to be there, everything's set up, and you're very confident. That's the setup we have. There's where check-in's going to be. This is where the pods are for people sitting. This is where we're going to sit. This is where the presentation is going to be. So you're very comfortable with the setup. On the other hand, if you're sticking with the virtual AGM like last year, a lot of it is the same. Set out an agenda with clear objectives, so the same thing. Sending out the required documents in advance of the meeting so that they have it. So again, much the same. Establish responsibilities for attendees. So who's going to set up the meeting? So in the previous one, who's booking the venue, etc. In this, who's actually going to set it up on Teams or whatever platform that you're using. Obviously, Teams is recommended. Who will chair the meeting, who will be presenting, are there going to be online presentations? Advise attendees that they need to have access to a laptop or mobile device to attend the AGM, and obviously recommend them to have a good area of Wi-Fi. Explain to attendees that an email address is required when setting up a Microsoft Teams account. Ensure that the email address for each attendee is correct before sending any invitations, because you will only send it to those people who are the delegates from the clubs to actually come. Ensure that details of how to access the AGM is shared well in advance. It's advised it should be sent out 14 days before the AGM is set to take place. And you can advise the attendees to become familiar with the platform prior to attending the AGM, just to know things like, where do I type in for chat, or how do I raise my hand? So different things in relation to it. And a reminder should also be sent to attendees 2 or 3 days before the AGM. So that's if it's a virtual AGM. We've 7 key points. So 7 things, regardless of it being on a virtual or face-to-face. So number 1 is notice. So set a date and time that will allow sufficient time to organise your AGM. So if you haven't already set it, it's important to get working on it now to see when you're actually going to hold the AGM. Provide sufficient advance notice of the meeting, including either in-person details or instructions on how to participate electronically. So whichever way it's going to be. If virtual, this may be the first time some of your members have taken part in a meeting, so just make sure they have sufficient time to familiarize themselves with the technology. I think everybody at this stage has got used to between Teams and Zoom and everything else, but still we'll get there. Ask clubs to indicate who will be attending as the representatives, which we've mentioned previously. Details can then be sent to them directly, so they're the only ones that will get access into the meeting. And it is important, like, have somebody assigned in the night that they're looking after the meeting room, and they're only letting people in who are due to be there as delegates, so there's not extra people in from different clubs. But you can also ensure the reps are registered, which is a key part. So they're all the things in relation to notice. So the point 1, given sufficient notice to everybody. Point 2, technology. So whether your meeting is in person or virtual, you may need technology. So reports may need to be presented. And if so, you have your laptop and projector for face-to-face events. There's no point in having everyone preparing their presentations and then there's no projector at the actual venue. Ideally, anyone who's presenting, if they could all send the presentations to one person to have on their laptop, it saves having to put in and out USB keys, etc. And it means everything's there just to click and start, just to make things a little bit more efficient for you. If it's virtual, then choose an appropriate technology platform and ensure it supports the expected number of attendees. It is recommended to use Microsoft Teams if holding your AGM online. Obviously, as official county executive members, you have your official LGFA emails allowing you access to Microsoft Teams. So that's where it's recommended. And advise members to log in from a location with good Wi-Fi connection, which is really important. Because if people are coming in and cutting out, it just means the meeting will be a little bit harder. For support then, so ensure you assign somebody to be able to assist delegates at your AGM. So for example, if they are missing printed reports that you have there face-to-face, or somebody to hand out voting papers, instead of on the night looking around going, who can help with this, that if you actually have assigned people to do this, assign people to do the check-in, to make sure there's plenty of support there and people assigned to do different roles. If it's virtual, having a technical support number available for members who have questions about accessing the meeting or have technical difficulties. Maybe somebody who's good with using Teams from your executive could be that support number. And if anybody's having any problems, they're able then to call them on the evening or the day that you're running your AGM. And appoint a sufficiently experienced officer to that role if possible. And that's in either case, that they're not having to come to you anyway going, well, what do I need to do here? That they're able to get on with it and allow other officers to do their role on the night or the day. For the setup then, prepare your venue before the delegates arrive. To set up a top table, and remember your setup for delegates must adhere to COVID guidelines. So if you cannot guarantee immunity, those clear pods of 6, and they should be very clear, and even stressing when people are checking in that they must go and sit in that, they can't go and move seats. And have a few, that's come back to the support, having a few people to make sure that they're actually not moving the seats on you. Avoid people gathering together, so assign personnel to direct people straight to seats after check-in. These volunteers can also ensure delegates wear their masks throughout the event. And I know we all love a cup of tea and everything else, but unfortunately for the year that's in it, just be careful that we're not setting up anything that encourages people to gather. So keeping it as simple as possible. For virtual meeting, display a holding screen that will welcome attendees. So please ensure you're muted while not talking to reduce background noise. And have somebody assigned on the night to be keeping out for that. So a moderator to mute people if they keep starting speaking or whatever, that you have somebody that's not the person speaking that needs to also concentrate on that. So having somebody assigned to it. Log in and open the meeting a good 15 minutes before the meeting if you're doing it online, as this will give people the chance to ensure their logins are working, and ensure at the beginning of the meeting while on the holding screen that the recording has been enabled for that meeting. For online also, as I mentioned, appoint that moderator who can feed back on questions but also keep people muted. But in both instances, both online and face-to-face, identify clear rules. So for example, if an attendee wants to speak, they should raise their hand in the room or use the raise hand button online and then speak to and called upon through the chairperson. And you can have that sheet as the guidelines, the AGM guidelines in relation to how you want people to act and respect each other at your AGM. The 3 R's. So the first one, rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. Regardless if that is in person, you might think we've gone through this 100 times before. It has been a while. We haven't had as much practice with our face-to-face meetings. So just think it all through from start to finish as to how it's going to work, that you're very comfortable. Okay, we know what's going to happen. These are the rough times and we're going to keep the schedule on this. The same if it's online, that you practice it, even bring on a few of the executive, especially if people are going to present reports, that they present the first few slides just to make sure everything's working. And for your AGM to run smoothly, it's essential to practice, especially, as I said, if you're not familiar with running online meetings. And if there's going to be a vote, ensure you've practiced how this is going to work, who's going to collect the voting slips, how they're going to be handed out, if it's online, and that you can easily work out if a vote has been passed. So make sure you have a system of knowing your voting strength before any votes are taking place. 6, so we're nearly there with these, smooth running. Set out your meeting guidelines, so who can speak when and for how long. Secondly, adhere to guidelines and only allow comment through the chairperson. So if it's virtual, make sure all speakers are in a quiet location where they can, where they will not be disturbed. So particularly your chairperson, who may do a lot of the speaking through it, that they're in a quiet location and that they're able to really control the AGM and there's no background noise there. Check any presentations you may be displaying or delivering at the AGM, whether that's online or in person. Firstly, that they work, but if it's online, then that you have a strong internet connection. This may mean not asking others to use the internet as much for the duration of the meeting, if there's others in the household. And for anyone who is doing a presentation, videos, if they're in an area of low internet, they're probably a no-no because they probably will delay it and they may not see them on the other side. For virtual meetings, it's recommended that all participants, apart from the officers presented, keep their cameras off just to prevent any drag on the bandwidth for better reception. And 7, have a plan B. So make a list of all the things that could go wrong, but hopefully they all go right. How will you respond if they do, and what impact on the meeting could be? So if you're face-to-face, what are some of the things that could potentially go wrong? How are you going to, what's going to be your plan B in relation to them? And what will the impact on the meeting be? The same with online, what could potentially go wrong? Some of the common online problems could be internet connection or quality problems, and feedback, people dropping out of the meeting. So what's going to happen? Who's going to be responsible for it, so that everybody doesn't get distracted at all times? And the same even in your face-to-face. If you have people constantly moving seats that shouldn't be, or whatever, who's going to be responsible for that? So it's not the chairperson or secretary or an officer who's at the top table maybe having to go down, but you are using some of those support people. So just have a think of the things that could potentially go a little AWOL, and how you're actually going to have a plan B for them. Post AGM then, and sometimes we forget about this, we run the AGM and we think, it's great, okay, job done, out of the way, but promote the key changes. So make sure people know the AGM happened. So what's key changes that maybe happened? Is there new officers in? Was the decisions made for the county going forward? What was the highlights of the year? And what's the next steps for going forward? So what have you decided that your AGM is going to be the next steps? Don't presume everyone knows. Just because there was representatives from everyone in the club doesn't mean everyone in the club knows. So tell them those key things. So let people know of the key decisions that was made at your AGM. If a position was not filled, work on it straight away. So if you have a position that wasn't filled, really get working. Don't let it drag on, because there's nothing worse where 3-4 months down the line, do you know what, we still never filled that position. And what has happened? Some other officer has now taken on a second role and really can't do either role to their full because they're doing it. So work on it straight away. Okay, what did we say was the strengths that was needed for that actual position? What type of person do we need? What qualities did we need? And then try and go after somebody who might be for it and get them nominated in the same process as per the official guide. But just don't let it linger. And remember, we did say you are better with a vacant position than someone that's there in name only. So on the night, don't just put somebody in for the sake of it. If they really don't want it, if they're not the right person, you're better delaying it and getting the right person. Because you'll end up frustrated as an executive over maybe one position versus holding off, getting the right person, and now you're all working as one team again. So getting the right people in there is really important. So just to wrap up, I know this is kind of a whistle-stop tour of the AGM, but I'm going to give you an opportunity to put in any questions that you might have as well. But maybe just to type in the chat there, from those slides that we're after going through, is there one thing that you are going to make a priority for you for your AGM in the coming weeks? Just from what you've seen on the slides there, feel free to type in the chat. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to type it in the chat also. And we keep an eye on them. Conscious that AGMs happen at different times for different people, but they are all coming up, as to try and make life a little bit easier in relation to it. But as I said, a key part of it is your county officer role descriptions, which are all available on our ladiesgaelic.ie. Go to the hub and then go to county, and you'll see all the role descriptions there to try and help you out as well. So we're just going to take a couple of seconds to see if we've any feedback on this one from anyone in the chat. And if not, if there's no questions, we'll wrap it up, but we'll give it a couple of seconds. Okay, everyone must their AGMs organised, which is great. As always, if anyone has any questions following this, as I said, this is one of our shorter ones because we get stuck into the county leadership series then. But if anyone does have any questions, don't be afraid to follow up with us. All our email addresses are on the website, or you can drop an email through to info@lgfa.ie and we will try and help you out in any way possible. So just to thank you for joining us in tonight. As I said, this is just a little kickstart, a little short webinar to get you started for AGM. There's plenty of great webinars coming up. Just check out our website on upcoming webinars. and we'll help you out as much as possible. So thanks very much, everyone.